All right, hello everyone. The way I have decided to start off our videos is to basically break up the lecture into multiple sections. So that way, what we'll end up having is a series of videos for each lecture. So that way, if there's a particular section that you want to review, you can go to a particular video and not have to scroll through one giant video. I will appreciate any feedback you guys can give me on how to improve this class. I apologize for the quality of the audio. I have not been able to get a dedicated mic quite yet because of the short notice. So currently right now I'm literally using my headphone inbuilt mic. So I am going to be working on that so that way in the future the audio quality is better. But I will tell you guys what I'm covering, what specifically from the textbook, and this will allow us to really work on um, having specific sections talked about in individual videos instead of having one giant multi-hour video. And I think that will be the best case for everyone. So please bear with me as I am adjusting to using my current setup. Uh, I will probably make changes throughout the quarter and hopefully things will kind of settle as we get a little bit into the mod. So, first thing I want to start off today is we are going to be in chapter one for the first lecture. And chapter one is considered a review section. And so, that being said, some of this material is probably stuff that you definitely need a recap or refresher on and could definitely use a little bit of a kind of review and a thorough discussion because something might seem small and obvious to you, but to someone else, it may actually be an issue. And to start off, we're actually looking at sign rules here because sign rules is an area that I noticed that a lot of students have a little bit of issue with. And so what I want to do today is kind of start off with that and make sure that everyone's on the same page because if you don't get this down within the next few class periods, it's going to be an issue in the long run. So don't uh, get into the situation where you feel like, oh, this is really simple. I don't need a review on this. And then you end up making very simple errors simply because you didn't recap some of the basic concepts. So with that, this material comes from section 1.5 and section 1.6 in the textbook. Section 1.5 begins on page 43, and the section 1.6 begins on 51. So if you want to go specifically to the textbook, that's where you can go. But what I want to talk about are your sign rules. So your sign rules for math are basically split into two main areas. Okay, on the one hand, you have adding and subtracting, which have their own set of rules, and you have multiplying and dividing, which will have their set of rules. Whoops, and that's what I'm talking about right there. So bear with me as I learn my new tools. So we have basically two sets of rules. Now what you want to do is there's a easy way to remember what you should do. You guys are going to be allowed a calculator, but you don't want to get in the habit of always using a calculator for basic operations because then what ends up happening is you forget your basic rules that are very important. So I do want you guys, especially for this first lecture today, to focus on not using a calculator because a calculator can't help you in certain areas. But this is one where it's important to know the difference. So for adding and subtracting, you actually should think about it in one of two ways. Okay, so let's start off with something simple. Let's say we have a um, simple math problem. Let's say negative 5 plus 7. Okay, now in this situation, it's not too difficult to see what the answer would be, but occasionally people struggle with this because they see the negative numbers in front and like they say a plus 7, and in their brain they say the answer is 12 or negative 12. But be careful with that because when you're adding and subtracting, the rule is that if the numbers have the same sign, you combine them, but if they're opposite signs, you always subtract. So here is actually the rule I want to keep you guys to keep in your mind. And so the rule I want you guys to keep in your head is that whenever the signs are opposite, it doesn't matter which one is the positive one. Okay, it doesn't matter that this is a +7. What matters is that this is a -5 and a +7. What you do is you subtract every single time. Okay, so you subtract regardless of which number is positive, which number is negative. The second part of this is you keep the sign of the larger number. And so in this case, the correct answer is, of course, going to be a +2, or you could just put 2. Okay. And again, that's because the sign of the larger number is going to be the main one. Okay, so notice the way a lot of people write this, they think about it as adding 7, but here's the thing about negative numbers. When you add, you are basically going in the opposite direction. The number should actually get smaller rather than bigger. Now, in the case of when you have the same signs, then it's always combined. And again, this is something I like to bring up because occasionally people have a little bit of issue when they get two negative numbers. Let's say it was -4 minus 5. Okay, so in this case, it doesn't matter that they're both negative. What I want you guys to think here is that the rule for the same sign is you always combine the values, combine the numbers. Now, that seems weird, but the rule for the signs are going to be that the sign stays the same. So if you've learned this before, if you recall adding, subtracting, you probably never learned your sign rules this way. Okay, and the reason why I do it this way is it helps minimize the confusion because occasionally people are unsure what happens. Okay, but for adding, subtracting, the rule is if they are opposite signs, you always subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. If they are the same signs, then you always combine it. You just keep the sign of the combined value. So you got to be careful. You got to practice that because it's an area that a lot of people overlook, and I often see that a lot of students have trouble with it. Now, the multiplying and dividing rules are a lot simpler to explain with just using simple examples, and they are completely different from the adding subtracting rules. This is key. So when you're solving problems, and you'll see this later tonight when we talk about order of operations problems, but it's very important that when you are multiplying and dividing, you go ahead and you um, remember that it's going to be different than adding and subtracting. Okay, now in this particular case, okay, let's do something simple like -3 times 4. All right, so the rule for dividing is when you multiply or divide by a negative number, it changes the sign of the other number that it's working with. So because we have a -3 times 4, the -3 is going to change this 4 to a -12 when you multiply through. So it becomes negative. If both numbers are negative, you end up instead getting a positive value because a negative times another negative, well, they cancel out the signs and you get a positive. Again, think about it as the negative sign automatically changes the other one. So if it's positive, it becomes negative. If it's already negative, then it becomes positive. And again, this is true for division, which when we talk about division in class, you'll see that we typically actually use a fraction bar. Okay, so let's say we have -3 divided by, well, let's actually go back a bit. Let's say that instead, I'll make this one easy. What if we have an 8 divided by a -2. Same idea with dividing. It works the same way as multiplying. 8 divided by -2 is actually -4. If they were both negatives, then of course the negative signs would end up canceling each other out. Negative divided by negative, this would be a +4. So hopefully that is clear. What we'll typically do in the structure of these types of lectures is once we go through some examples, um, I will give you guys a few example problems to try. And what you'll want to do is pause the video and um, work on the problems yourself, try to get an answer, and then we will walk through a solution. So that's what's going to happen in the next stage here. Okay, so here we have a few problems. Whenever we get to an example problem type, what we're going to do is I'm going to instruct you guys to pause your video, and I'm going to leave about a 10-second gap. So that way you guys can attempt the problems on your own and then you can compare your answers. Now we will work out the problems. So that way if you're unsure how to approach one, you'll get to see it broken down right in front of you. So that way it will be a little bit more clear. So at this point, go ahead and pause your video and we'll resume in about 10 seconds. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through these. So for adding and subtracting, which is what the first two are, what we're going to see is that, again, you have to look at the signs to determine whether or not you should combine the numbers or subtract the numbers. So in the first case here, -12 plus 4, because the signs are opposite, you are going to subtract. Again, it does not matter the size of the number yet. So because of that, a plus and a minus, we subtract. So normally 12 minus 4, that's going to be 8. The second thing you do then is you look at the numbers, and the larger number is going to determine your sign. So because 12 is larger, this is going to be -8. So it seems obvious at first, but again, practice this, repeat that rule to yourself. For the second one, because the signs are the same, we can just combine these. So 20 combined with 6, that's 26. And because they both have the same sign, we're going to keep that sign. It stays a negative value. Okay, so those pretty straightforward. For multiplying, again, the rule is that the negative sign will change the sign of the other number. So the -5 times 6 is going to change the sign. So 5 times 6 is normally 30. And then negative times a positive is going to be negative. Similar with division, you can divide 27 by 3. Notice the number value does not change. It's going to be 9. But because we have a negative divided by a negative, this negative changes that negative, which makes it positive, so the answer is a +9. And here we have a quick recap of the sign rules. So again, bear with me. I know my handwriting is terrible and there are occasional typos, but in the meantime, this will allow us to go through material in a pace that will allow people to understand what's going on, and it will allow you guys to shoot me questions if you are having issues. So um, we're going to go ahead and end this video, and the next video is going to go into our fraction review, which will probably be the longest video set for tonight.